The names are familiar: Roosevelt, Astor, Forbes, institutions like Yale and Harvard. You recognize them instantly. What you probably do not realize is that their wealth originated from an identical source, systematically distributing opium throughout China. Massive quantities, countless addictions, extraordinary profit margins, followed by 2 centuries of historical concealment. Until this moment. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president immortalized on Mount Rushmore, credited with steering America through economic catastrophe. His family's prosperity originated from narcotic commerce, industrial-grade opium distribution, widespread addiction and death, immense wealth for the Roosevelts, and they operated within a much larger network. The Astor dynasty, America's wealthiest family for generations. Drug proceeds, Forbes magazine's foundation, opium revenues, Yale's secretive skull and bone society, financed by narcotic smugglers, Harvard's historic buildings, constructed with Chinese opium silver. Some of America's most prominent dynasties, the educational institutions shaping national leadership, the powerful families maintaining influence today, all constructed by flooding China with narcotics on an industrial scale. Thousands of tons shipped, profit margins exceeding 400%. Then they systematically erased the evidence, revised historical accounts, established cultural institutions with tainted money, and ensured public ignorance. Until now. The documentation exists. Shipping manifests survive. Financial ledgers rest in archives. What they demonstrate is that America's aristocratic class, the families we're conditioned to admire, accumulated fortunes through activities that would warrant imprisonment today. Except they executed it against an entire nation, poisoned millions, decimated the Chinese economy, and acquired sufficient wealth to erase themselves from history. This is the narrative they've worked to suppress, the drug distributors who became American nobility and maintained that facade for 200 years. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, America's 32nd president, who guided the nation through depression and global war. His image stands alongside Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln on Mount Rushmore, an archetypal American leader. But educational curricula omit crucial context. The wealth enabling FDR's privileged upbringing, his Harvard education, his political ascension, all originated from narcotic money. His grandfather, Warren Delano II, accumulated millions smuggling opium into China. Countless Chinese became dependent, massive death tolls, and the Delano family prospered enormously. They weren't isolated actors. The Astors, America's wealthiest clan in the 19th century, opium revenues. The Forbes lineage, yes, that Forbes, constructed their publishing empire on opium proceeds. The Perkins family financed Yale University with narcotic money. The Cabot family, Boston's elite, opium merchants. The Russell family established Skull and Bones at Yale, opium smugglers. America's most influential, respected, powerful families constructed their fortunes through drug distribution, not peripheral involvement. Market dominance. 10% of China's opium imports by the 1830s. Literal tons of narcotics, hundreds of millions in currency, an entire generation of Chinese devastated by addiction. And American families accumulated sufficient wealth to establish universities, museums, and political legacies that persist today. This narrative remains untold. How America's elite accumulated fortunes in the opium business, how they sanitized that history, and how these same families who prospered from drug sales then spent a century criminalizing narcotics for everyone else. The contradiction is staggering, and the documentation is irrefutable.
This is Psalms chapter 12 and verse 8. The wicked walk on every side when the vilest men are exalted. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Quadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasher Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwat, who are believing this word, in all truth and in sincerity. All right, I want to go into a lesson inspired by the clip that you just saw. And I want to use that as an example, to highlight the son of perdition, who is Esau Edom, the so-called white man, as a nation of people beginning with their elites. All right. And what they brought out in that example is that a lot of these influential people in today's society concerning the so-called white man presidents, senators, congressmen, a lot of their fortune goes back to crime. Now, that video is really kind of twofold because we can go into the treachery of the so-called white man and his ability to loot and pillage. All right. The first crime family, the original crime family. You know, everything Jake does is a cheap imitation of who the so-called white man is as a nation of people. And our people, 2/3 of them have modeled themselves after the original crime family, which is the so-called white man as a nation of people. The reason you can't call what they do a gang is because it's a government. What Jake does on the corners and the blocks, the so-called white man does as a government. From drugs, human trafficking, you name it. All right, this is Jeremiah chapter 5 and verse 26. I want to highlight that. It says, "For among my people are found wicked men. They lay wait as he that setteth snares. They set a trap. They catch men." All right, so when you deal with the opium, you know, the opium wars and you go into that history, you see that the so-called white man intentionally, you know, got the so-called Chinese, because they are Moabites, got them addicted to opium to fuel the opium trade. All right. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt will become president. But one of his ancestors, all right, and we're going to get into that guy, he made his fortune in the drug trade. And that fortune was passed down to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who never really made significant money in his own lifetime, but was still able to live that type of lifestyle because of the opium. All right. And for those who don't know, you know, opium is converted to heroin. All right. And many other things. All right. When you deal with downers, I believe, you know, Percocets, Xanax, things of that nature, you know, so you have prescription opioids, and then you have the street opioids, which is heroin. All right. So I want to go into this article real quick. All right. So it says the blue blood families that made fortunes in the opium trade. It says long before the Sacklers appeared on the scene, families like the Astors, the Peabodys, and the Delanos cemented their upper crust status through the global trade in opium. It says through most of human history, opium circulated in very small quantities and was used primarily as a medicine. Anatolia was probably the region in which farmers first began to cultivate poppies as an important commercial crop, and the practice is thought to have spread outwards from there. The armies of Alexander the Great are believed to have carried opium into Iran, hence the derivation of the Persian and Arabic words for opium, afyan from the Greek opion, and the Perso-Arabic terms in turn engendered the word afim, widely used across Indian subcontinent, and the Chinese term afyan and yapyan. Now I want to jump down to the point. All right, because we don't need the history of the opium in particular. All right, it says, let me jump down. It says the pioneer in that regard was the Dutch East India Company, which made extensive use of opium in its quest for commercial and territorial expansion in Southeast Asia. All right, and the Dutch East India Company is a British company. All right, during British colonialism. All right, it says, yet while the Dutch led the way in enmeshing opium with European colonialism, it was the British in India who perfected the model of the colonial narco state when they began to use opium to pay for their imports of Chinese tea, a commodity that produced enormous revenues for Britain in the colonies as well as the metropolis. After Britain, the country that benefited the most from the China trade and therefore the global traffic in opium was none other than the United States. And in the United States, unlike in Britain, it is well established that the beneficiaries included many of the preeminent families, institutions, and individuals in the land. All right, now before I continue, because I may have misspoke, I just want to look up Dutch East India Company real quick. All right, it's a Dutch trading company, Slovakia. All right, so the Dutch East India Company, all right, basically laid that groundwork, and then Britain came in and perfected it. All right, concerning the opium trade. All right, continuing, it says, this is not to imply that fewer British subjects benefited from opium. Quite the contrary. Since Britain was the prime mover behind the global drug traffic, its involvement with opium was obviously on a much larger scale than that of the United States. Not only was the British colonial apparatus in India overseeing the production and distribution of most of the world's opium, but Britain was also home to the single largest and richest group of private traders involved in smuggling opium into China. All right. So when you think about drug dealers, most people in the world think about Jake. Think about so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, the cartels. But this is the original crime family, all right, on display. And everything that our people do is a model or a cheap imitation of what the so-called white man has been able to do for centuries. All right. Now, I want to go here real quick because I want to put scriptures in as well. There's Isaiah 32:5. All right. And I'm going to read it in the NLT. It says, "In that day, ungodly fools will not be heroes. Scoundrels will not be respected." Because people look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt as one of the greatest presidents. And, you know, you have these presidents that get on these podiums and they pretend to be these upstanding, traditional, righteous individuals. And then when you look at where their money comes from, where their fortune comes from, it's from crime. The same shit that they'll lock Jake up for, they've built an empire off of. That's why the scriptures talk about the hypocrite and their joy being for a moment. All right, now I want to continue. All right, it says I want to highlight it so you can follow along. All right, it says it is possible that the pathways of the fortunes that British traders brought back could be tracked in the same way the circulation of the wealth derived from slavery has been charted in recent years. This is important, right? Because now you're dealing with human trafficking and drug trafficking. All right, continuing. But the task would not be an easy one because opium money seeped so deeply into 19th century Britain that it essentially became invisible through its ubiquity. All right. And that word ubiquity goes into usefulness, I believe. Let me look it up real quick. Oh, it says the fact of appearing everywhere or of being very common. All right. Continuing, it says, in any event, this exercise has not been undertaken, possibly because of its inherent difficulties or because it would threaten cherished myths about Britain's imperial past, or because there exists no domestic constituency to press for such an investigation as was done for slavery. So one important thing that you see in this article is that it talks about destroying the mystery or the mythos of Britain being an upstanding country, the white man's burden of going around the planet and civilizing individuals. Well, when you look at the history, it was actually just drug trade, human trafficking, and really just robbery. All right. This is criminality. It's just so highly organized. People don't look at it like a gang. All right, real quick. This is Isaiah chapter 25 and verse 7. And it reads, "And he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people and the veil that is spread over all nations." All right. And that myth is being destroyed actively. You know, the scriptures talk about the son of perdition being revealed in his time. And now the so-called white man as a nation of people are now being revealed to be the wicked. While they point the finger and determine who is considered a terrorist, who's considered a criminal, their entire empire has been built on crime. All right, crimes against humanity. Now, I want to continue because I want to get the point that was mentioned in the clip that you just saw. All right, this is a very beautiful article, though. But I want to jump down to the mention of, I believe Roosevelt was mentioned in this. All right, give me 1 second. All right, I'll just start. I'll start here. It says another measure of the impact of the China trade on the United States is the sheer number of American towns and cities named Canton. There are more than 30, twice as many as are named after London. Yet while there are many American cantons, there is not a single Guangzhou or even Wampao. Those names would perhaps have made China's unseen presence within the country uncomfortable. The word Canton does serve to create a very particular niche within American memory, one in which China was domesticated and anglicized, and the disconcerting realities of the opium trade were rendered palatable. All right, now I have to start up to get the context of what they're saying right here. All right, it says, such was the influence of the China trade on the United States that its place in American memory is very different from that in British or Indian memory. One sign of this is that while Britain possesses vast collections of Chinese objects, books, and artworks, it does not, so far as I know, have any museums devoted solely to the China trade. Its Chinese artifacts are mostly housed in institutions that are global in scope, such as the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum. In America, by contrast, there exists a museum dedicated entirely to the China trade. Nor is this the only one. There are several others in which the China trade figures prominently, such as the impressive and well-funded Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. All right, so they're going into how history has not remembered what actually happened with the relationship between Britain and China, and then later on United States and China dealing with the drugs. All right, that part of the legacy of the drug trade between China and the so-called white man in Britain and the United States has vastly been covered up. All right, and this is why it comes as a shock to people now in this day and age when they hear about a prominent president and his money coming from the drug trade. You know, I believe Kennedy, his family had ties to bootlegging. I don't know if they specifically said that all of his money was tied into bootlegging. All right, but they say a significant amount of his money, the Kennedys in general, came from prohibition. All right, so the bootlegging, the selling of alcohol when it was prohibited. So a lot of these so-called prominent Edomite, these so-called prominent white families, a lot of their money comes from illegal activity. All right, and while they make Jake the face of crime, they've literally been able to loot and pillage and change the narrative so that the world does not look at them and associate them with the crimes that they've committed as a nation of people. All right, and that's why the Lord said the joy of the hypocrite is but for a moment. All right, real quick. This is Job chapter 20 and verse 5. It says that the triumphing, let me start at 4. It says, knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment? Though his excellency mount up to the heavens, and his head reach unto the clouds, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, where is he? All right, and I also want to get this. This is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 8. It says, and then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Because now you have all of this history that's starting to come out. And the reason that the so-called white man left these type of historical events in his books, because he never assumed that it would be attributed to him as a nation of people. Because the so-called white man is so used to looking at himself as an individual, they never sit back to think that all of these crimes are attributed to you as a nation of people. All right, the son of perdition is not talking about one man. It's talking about a nation of people that are considered the wicked. And when you put all of their crimes in a pot, it's obvious who the wicked is. All right, that becomes obvious. All right, this is Malachi chapter 1 and verse 4. Whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. So it's talking about a nation of people. It's not just saying one personal man is considered the wicked. No, it's talking about an entire nation of people. All right, and that's exactly what you see happening now that the Lord has allowed this truth to be unveiled. All right, it also unveils who the wicked is. And this is just a small example of what this system is built upon. All right, we know all too well that the history of America is built upon rape, robbery, and murder. But then when you look at the other relationships they've had with nations like the Chinese, a lot of our people don't know why the Chinese, are adversarial against the so-called white man in the West, because they remember this history. It's just we don't have access to this history a lot of times. But as the Lord has revealed this truth, as the truth is starting to spring out in the earth, it's also revealing who the wicked is. All right. And that's important for the time that we're living in. All right. I'll end it with this. This is 2nd Ezra chapter 6. And I want to jump down to verse 27. It says, "For evil shall be put out, and deceit shall be quenched. As for faith, it shall flourish. Corruption shall be overcome, and the truth, which hath been so long without fruit, shall be declared." And that's exactly what's happening. All right, so I want to end this by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasher Allah, and a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. Shalom.